Perfection is the enemy of good enough. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. That's what a cadre told us at Special Forces Assessment and Selection at a place called Camp McCall, just west of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The instructor was giving us a class on the tips and tricks, the best practices, the ways to deal with the upcoming team week. Let me go back for a second. Special Forces Assessment and Selection is the 3-week tryout period where it's your interview to see if you're good enough to attend the Special Forces Qualification Course. And if you pass that, you'll earn your Green Beret. The final week of selection is called Team Week, where everyone stops competing as an individual and comes together in a team setting, because down the road you will work on a team and you will have to work together. He told us perfection is the enemy of good enough. Good enough will get you there, gentlemen. So, 2 days later, there we were, on the road, in the dust, and the sand, and the mud, and the heat, and the humidity, and we were tired, but we had a job to do because we wanted something. We had our materials, we had telephone poles, we had metal poles, we had ropes, we had tires, we had lashings, ammo cans, weight, basically. It wasn't this perfect puzzle of materials. It didn't all fit together, it didn't all make sense, but we had to go through and what the cadre told us to do. And he gave us our task. Our task was we had to take what we had and move overland to a point on a map. The condition, we had what we had and nothing else. And the standard was a time standard. A to B as fast as possible or suffer the consequences. So the 16 of us went back, we came up with our plan, and then we went back and briefed the cadre. We presented our plan, and he gave us his advice. Gentlemen, that will never work. Maybe he'd seen it before. We disregarded this information. We knew better, or so we thought we did. We set about our plan. We put the telephone poles on the metal poles, and the metal poles on the tires, and the tires on the road. Meanwhile, the other groups of gentlemen, they had gotten onto their materials, thrown something together, and gone down the road. They had thrown some insults our direction for good measure, because that's what you do. And we were the last group. We weren't deterred. We started doing our best. We started for perfection. We started to make this 6-wheeled monster truck that the cadre had spoke of, that he said wouldn't work. We made our knots perfect and our lashings perfect, and everything was perfect. And when we got on the road and it was time to set off, we took 8 steps and it fell apart. It may look something like that. These gentlemen were unfortunate enough to have to carry theirs. We were lucky enough to build a boat on land, on a dirt road, with an anchor out the back, which is very difficult to push. We had disregarded that piece of information that the cadre had given us, that perfection was the enemy of good enough. So today I have 2 goals for today. My first goal, I want to give you an insight into my life, my obsession with becoming a Green Beret, how I lost that obsession, how I learned about TBI, traumatic brain injury, or commonly known as concussions, what it can do to a person, what it can stop you from doing, and how I can help. The second goal is very simple. I want to help just one person. I want to help just one person out there that has the symptoms of TBI. And I want them to recognize what it can do to you. And I want to convince them that if they can see me up here, and talk about it, then they can reach out too, and they can get help, and it's okay. And if I can do those 2 things, then today was a success. The Green Berets, our motto, De Oppresso Liber. We always have been and continue to be the masters of unconventional warfare and chaos, the quiet professionals. John F. Kennedy once referred to the Green Beret as a symbol of excellence. We made our mark in Vietnam, Kosovo, Panama, South America, the Middle East, Africa, and most recently, 12 Green Berets in the events after 9/11 went into the north of Afghanistan, and in a matter of weeks, rode south with the Northern Alliance and toppled the Taliban government. I knew from the moment I arrived at basic combat training that I wanted to be a Green Beret, and this is the path that I took to get there. In April of 2011, I arrived at basic training, where I excelled and graduated later that summer. My follow-on assignment was advanced individual training. I was going to be a field artilleryman at the home of field artillery in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, once again. And then luckily, upon graduating, I was stationed in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. This probably prompted me to sign up so quickly as I did. And 90 days later, I signed the waiver, I signed the release, and I had my first go. I went out to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I attended my first Special Forces Assessment Selection. Now, I will tell you this about Special Forces Assessment Selection, or the regiment all over. Everything I'm going to tell you about the Special Forces, the regiment, is all open source information. You can find it on the internet or made-for-TV documentaries. Nothing that I will say will put anyone in danger or give away any secrets. Special Forces Command takes great pride in updating training and keeping it relevant and secret. But there is one thing called the attrition rate, the dropout rate, the failure rate. In my first time through, I succumbed to that rate with a knee injury and was medically dropped halfway through. But 8 months later, I trained up, I healed up, and I went back. And I graduated what would commonly be known as the last hard class, because everyone that came after me didn't do it as hard. Upon getting selected, the Army said, "Nick, it is time for you to attend the qualification course. But first, you need to jump out of a high-performance aircraft, traveling at 1,250 feet above ground level at approximately 120 nautical miles per hour." So I went out to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I did just that. I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane 5 times. And on smacking the ground for the 5th time, it was time for me to attend the Special Forces Qualification Course at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the Q course. The Special Forces Qualification Course is an ever-increasingly more difficult set of courses and classes that teach you everything you need to know about how to be an entry-level Green Beret. They'll teach you leadership skills. They'll teach you language skills. I myself speak Thai. They'll teach you infantry tactics and then your job, or your MOS, military occupational specialty. I was an engineer. I specialize in construction, demolition, explosives, and logistics. If you pass that, there's a big exercise at the end called Robin Sage, and if you make it through that, like I did, on October 23rd, 2014, I earned the right to wear the coveted Green Beret as a member of the United States Army Special Forces. This was the culmination of 3.5 years of obsession. If you ever get a chance to talk in depth with a Green Beret, you'll find a few commonalities between us. But the one similarity you will find is that we would never give up, no matter how hard it got or how dire the situation. I spent 7 years, 183 days in the United States military, and every single one of those days, I was either thinking about being, trying to be, or being a Green Beret. To say I was consumed would be an understatement. I was obsessed. I picked the highest mountain in the distance that the Army had to offer, and I went after it head on. Earning my Green Beret is the single greatest accomplishment of my life, other than convincing my wife to marry me. Upon graduation, I moved from North Carolina to Washington State, just south of Seattle, to Fort Lewis, Washington. I was assigned to 1st Special Forces Group, an Asia-centric group, and then subsequently a dive team. A dive team's primary mission is surface and subsurface maritime operations. On my first training exercise with my team, on my first day on the ocean, on my first time in a 12.5-foot Zodiac raft, on my first time in rough seas, and on the first large wave we hit, I was thrown up and out of the boat, and when I returned, it was on my face, and I was knocked unconscious into the water. My teammates pulled me back in, where I regained consciousness, and then 30 minutes later, I was struck underneath the chin with a 35-horsepower outboard Mercury engine, and we continued to roll to shore for the next hour and a half. Upon standing on the shore, I was assessed to have a traumatic brain injury, most likely severe. I was not taken to the hospital. In my concussed and woozy state the next day, stepping up into a van, I smacked the top of my head against the door frame. That disoriented me enough to fall and trip backwards and bounce my head off the concrete. From the moment my face met with the front right of that boat, my career as a fully functioning Green Beret was over 6 months after it started. I want you to imagine sitting in a chair. And I want you to imagine sitting in that chair on your hands for 8 hours a day, and you stare at a chessboard. And you look at the pieces, and they're all lined up. And you study how they'll move. And you just imagine the combinations, and how you'll react when someone moves, and how you'll deal with adversity, how you'll deal with panic, how you'll deal with wins and losses. It's all you think about. You're obsessed. And then one day you sit down, and they tell you, you're never going to get to touch the pieces. You're never going to get to see if you play chess. You can play chess. You're never going to know how good you are. I've led a fairly active life up until the point of my injuries. Outdoors, sports. For some reason, I always led with my face. The symptoms, I'm sorry. During my life, I've had several mild traumatic brain injuries or concussions, and then a few severe concussions for good measure. Didn't want to leave those out. The symptoms that had been surfacing and diminishing for years were back, and they were here to stay. They still haven't gone away. I want to tell you this about TBI. Every time you get one, you don't just get all the way better. Something stays with you. Let's say you twist your knee 10 times. Here's some of the symptoms of traumatic brain injury. Let's say you twist your knee 10 times. Something's going to stay. Something's going to add up. It's a cumulative effect. And the same thing happens in your head. To this, I would add anger and paranoia. TBI will make you see things that aren't there. So what happened after my injury? I went to bed for 45 days. I could barely eat. I could barely sleep. And when I could, I had nightmares. I was taking way too many painkillers. When I went back to work 2 months later, I was a different person. I had changed. The person that went out onto that ocean never came back. For better or for worse, I was on a completely different life path. Now, it wasn't all bad. During my recovery, I fell under some excellent leadership that took care of me, that wanted to help, that knew I still had something to give to the military, something left. I was allowed to go to Korea and lead missions in Korea and Japan, and logistical missions that sent soldiers all over the world. I met my beautiful wife. I got to travel, and I did progress, but only from an administrative standpoint. Now, what's that mean? There's two kinds of Green Berets. There's the operators on the teams saving the world. And then there's support. Guys behind the scenes that get those guys on the front lines what they need on time and usually over budget. The gravity of my injuries didn't really set in. The symptoms, the injuries, everything all added up. And it didn't really set in until I returned from Korea and back to my home unit. And they were training up to go to Afghanistan. And in the spring of 2018, my unit, they went to Afghanistan without me. And in the fall, they came back. All but one. Now, while I will not compare what I go through with what that young man's family feels for the loss of him every day, I can tell you this. I would not wish these symptoms or this pain on anyone. During their deployment to Afghanistan, my time in the military was coming to an end. And on November 19th, 2018, I was promoted to Sergeant First Class, and on November 20th, I was medically retired from the United States military. My obsession was over. So let's tie it all back to the beginning. Team Week, that apparatus. I had not mentally prepared myself for what was going to happen when everything fell apart. The symptoms had got the best of me, and they did continue to get the best of me until now. I am doing better. I am progressing, and what continues to make me better is helping others. And that's what I'm here trying to do, trying to convince that one person out there, that one person that has these symptoms, and if I tell them that if I can stand up here and I can pour my heart out to strangers and tell them I'm going through this, then you can do it too. I want to stress this more than anything else. If you're going through something, if you're hurting, if you have these symptoms and these injuries, it's going to be okay. People out there care about you. They want to help. There are programs and ways to get help. Reach out to your friends. Check on them. Ask the question, does this seem right? Everyone has something to tell you if you'll just listen to them. And sometimes that's all it takes. Ask the question. I want to tell that one person out there that it's going to be okay. No one's going to judge you. That's what I thought, and no one has. I didn't fight the enemy overseas, but I fight with myself in my head every day. I know how it is. Like many veterans, I've suffered from alcoholism, anger, and depression. And all those symptoms come out at all the wrong times. And for that, I'm sorry. I'll leave you with this. You don't have to get it all right in the beginning. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Do one thing, do it well, and move on to the next. Just like Team Week, your life now is not going to be a perfect puzzle. It's not all going to fit together. But somehow you have to lash it together, you have to tie it together, and you have to get it moving down the road, one step at a time. And if you could do that, well, you can find your new purpose. You can find your new chess game. Dea presso libere.